Peace, peace, peace. What it is, it's Brother Tavon Sueno, aka the Orthodox Moor. And real quick, I wanted to do a small lesson on this concept of proving Israelites in America via the slave trade. I've seen a lot of pushback on this concept, and there's something I want to show to both sides of the argument real quick. Um, Something people might have heard of is the Free Sundry Moors Act, where certain Moors in 1790, 1789 petitioned in the state of South Carolina to not be recognized as Negroes, but to be recognized as Moors under a treaty of peace and friendship signed with American Morocco in 1787, etc. Um, so something I want to point out on that particular document is it's not just talking about Moors there, and I'll show what I'm talking about. I'll make this real short and sweet and not do too much with it. I just want people to be able to see what's going on real quick. So this is the Moors Sundry Act of 1790. Just a real quick cursory concept of what it's saying here is the Moors Sundry Act of 1790 was a 1790 advisory resolution passed by South Carolina's House of Representatives classifying the status of free subjects of the Sultan of Morocco, Mohammed bin Abdullah. The resolution offered the opinion that free citizens of Morocco were not subject to laws governing blacks and slaves, etc. And this has to do with the Negro Act of 1740. This also has to do with the Moroccan Treaty for Peace and Friendship, which I'll get into both of those real quick. But something that I wanted to really break down to people are the people who are petitioning for this concept and what their story is and what they're saying their story is. So in State House records and documentation and whatnot, which you can see here, these free Moors have names. There's 4 men and there's 4 women, and these are 4 pairs of people who are married or whatnot. And the names of the males are Francis, Daniel, Hammond, and Samuel. And the names of their wives are Fatima, Flora, Sarah, and Clorinda. So I want you to hear this real quick. The free Moors, Francis, Daniel, Hammond, and Samuel, petitioned on behalf of themselves and their wives, Fatima, Flora, Sarah, and Clorinda. They explained how some years ago, while fighting in defense of their country, they and their wives were captured and made prisoners of war by an African king. After this, a certain Captain Clark had them delivered to him, promising they would be redeemed by the Moroccan ambassador residing in England and returned to their country. Instead, he transported them to South Carolina and sold them for slaves. Since then, by the great industry, they purchased freedom from their respective masters. They requested that as freeborn subjects of a prince in alliance with the U.S., that they should not be considered subject to a state law, then enforced, known as the Negro Law. But if they be found guilty of any crime or misdemeanor, that they would receive a fair trial by lawful jury. So again, these are people who are stipulating that while in service of their country, in defense of their country, that they and their wives were captured and made prisoners of war by an African king. And then after this, a certain Captain Clark had them delivered to him, promising that they would be redeemed by the Moroccan ambassador residing in England. So they go from being prisoners of war of this African king to thinking that, okay, we're going to go be delivered to the Moroccan ambassador in England. Cool. That doesn't happen. They get transported to South Carolina and are sold as slaves there. Sold as slaves there. They end up eventually earning they buy their own freedom, buy the freedom of their wives, etc., whatnot. And then as free individuals, they're saying we want to be able to petition the state to not be recognized by the laws of this state, which stipulate that Negroes are on a different par with other citizens and whatnot. So let me break that part down right quick. So the Negro Act of 1740, right, in South Carolina. It says some very interesting things, but the following is an excerpt from the first page of the first chapter on the status of the Negro, his rights and disabilities in the Negro Law of South Carolina. Okay. Section 1, the Act of 1740, etc. Right. I declare all Negroes and Indians free, Indians in amity with the government, Negroes, mulattoes, and mestizos, who now are free, accepted to be slaves, the offspring to follow the condition of the mother, and that such slaves are chattel persons. Um, Going further, it stipulates this though. It says, Section 4, the term Negro is confined to slave Africans, the ancient Berbers, and their descendants. It does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa, such as the Egyptians, the Moors, or the Negro Asiatics, such as the Lascars. One more time. This is Section 4 here. The term Negro is confined to slave Africans, the ancient Berbers. Okay? These are the people being enslaved, and their descendants. It does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa, such as the Egyptians, the Moors, and the Negro Asiatics, such as the Lascars. To be clear, these people of Africa still cannot be labeled Negro under U.S. law. They are still not classified as Negro under U.S. law. But the people being enslaved are ancient Berbers, and that's something I want to touch on real quick. But again, to be clear, these people who bought their freedom and petitioning the state are stipulating we do not want to be labeled as Negroes. So in order not to be labeled as Negroes, they're saying, check this out: we are subject of a prince who is in treaty with your country. Talking about the treaty of peace and friendship, etc. This is one from 1777, but there's multiple treaties of peace and friendship. Here we go. Talking about 1786, 1787, and whatnot, right? And so this is a treaty with Morocco and America. And within that treaty, they stipulate that if either of the parties shall be at war with any nation, whatever, and take a prize belonging to that nation, and there shall be found on board subjects or effects belonging to either of the parties, the subject shall be set at liberty, and their effects returned to the owners, etc. Right? There's a bunch of conditions concerning how each country is supposed to treat each other, but basically, it's a treaty of peace, and basically they're finding out, hey, if one of our people ends up on your shores or whatnot, and they're in a bad way, you help them out basically. And just so people can see, does this apply to the Moors? Yes, this applies to the Moors. If they talk about Moors in here 5 different times, 5 different times. I'll link all this down below so y'all can check this out on your own time or whatnot. I'm trying to keep this real short, so as not to drag on for people. But again, they're aware of this treaty. And so they're petitioning not to be known as Negroes, because Negroes are basically seen as slave Africans at that juncture, right? They're like, no, we don't want to be known as slaves. We want the rights of a citizen and an individual. If something were to happen to us and we go into court, we don't want to be treated like a slave. We want to be treated like a citizen, like an individual, etc. And so these 8 individuals petition the state. And again, the state comes out and stipulates that they have considered the same and are of the opinion that no law of this state can in its construction or operation apply to them, and that persons who are subjects of the Emperor of Morocco, being free in this state, are not tribal by the law of the better ordering and governing of Negroes and other slaves. Okay? So that's what they find. They petition the state, and the state agrees. Yeah, you know what? If you are subject to the Emperor of Morocco, we cannot treat you like you Negroes. That's just, we can't do that. And so that's on the books in South Carolina. But here's the interesting thing about that. So they're saying that they were enslaved in Africa and then brought here. So I want you to understand something about their names. These are not like typical African names, right? These names denote some very interesting things about these people. First and foremost, I want to point out that 3 of their names, Daniel, Samuel, and Sarah, are all biblical names. Now, these are not the names that slave owners gave them. These are their names. They're free at this juncture, saying that we're petitioning under these names, and we were taken and made prison. We were fighting in defense of our country, and that we're subjects of Morocco, defense of our. That's their country. They're saying they're in defense of, and they're prisoners of war. They were made prisoners of war by an African king. So in Africa, these are their names. In Africa, these are their names, and 3 of their names are biblical Israelite names. You're not going to find Muslims named Daniel. Daniel's not even mentioned as a prophet in the Quran. You're not going to find that. That's not a Muslim name. That's an Israelite name. That's a biblical Jewish name or Israelite name. Samuel, same thing. Sarah, same thing. Now Fatima, that's a straight up Muslim name. Straight up Muslim name. Interesting names here are Flora, Clarinda. Both of those are Spanish names, indicating that these women, again, might have been from Al-Andalus, or they might have been from a pocket of Moors that might have had some ties to Al-Andalus or Spain or whatnot, living in Morocco, etc. Same thing with the name Hammond and Francis or whatnot. So Hammond is an English name, and like they stipulated, they thought they were going to be taken to an ambassador, a Moroccan ambassador in England. A lot of people don't know that there were Moors in England under treaty, etc., whatnot. Same time period. At one point, the Moors were going to work with the English to fight against the Spanish in the Caribbean before the Spanish ever even got a foothold in the Americas. That didn't come to fruition and whatnot, but I'm saying that to stipulate the long relationship, etc. with. Francis is obviously like that goes back to a French concept. Again, you had Moors in all these areas: France, Spain, England, Morocco, etc. Other parts of Africa. And at the time, you do have Morocco and other places in war with each other. But what's interesting about that is it stipulates that in the Negro Act that Berbers, ancient Berbers, are the Negroes being enslaved. And so what I want to show here is that this is in 1790, okay? And I want to show the words of a man named Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun is a 14th century Arab historian, and he speaks on the concept of the Berbers, not just the Judaizers, but Berbers in general. But he says some interesting things about certain tribes of the Berbers. Again, these are the people these are the Berbers who are being. This is 14th century, by the way. Again, this is before the slave trade kicks in full, and this is before the many years before the Treaty of Peace and Friendship and the Free Sundry Moors petition and whatnot. But this should give you an idea in terms of the description of the people of the time and the people who are being called the Berbers, etc., the ancient Berbers and all that type of stuff. But this is what he says about Judaized Berbers or Israelite Berber tribes at the time. He's talking about, he names off different Berber tribes that he believes to be intertwined with the Israelite concept. And so one of the first tribes he talks about are the Jarawa. And you may know this tribe because they're famous for the concept of Queen Kahina or Dia. Al-Kahina. She's a queen who resists Islamic spread throughout North Africa. Eventually, her sons convert to Islam, but she's a famous queen in North African history in Islamic history as well for wars and etc. whatnot. She's also famous for other military purposes. Whatnot. I won't get into here, but she is somewhat of note, and she is of the Jarawa Berber tribe, and they're seen as a group of Judaized Berbers or Israelite Berbers, etc. Second are the Zanata, and they are a big confederacy of Berbers, and this includes the Jarawa and the Magrawa and the Banu Ifran. And that Banu Ifran is real interesting because again that's like the Banu Ephraim, and again that's one of the Israelite tribes or whatnot. So these are again some of the Judaized Berbers, the Zanata, the Jarawa, the Magrawa, the Banu Ephraim. And then next is a group called the Nefzawa. And what's interesting about them is they have a link to a Yemenite migration. A lot of people don't understand that there is a large migration spoken of from Yemen, from the Himyarite kingdoms and whatnot in Yemen, and also having a link to some of the Ethiopian kingdoms as well. And when they come through from the first to the fifth, when these people come through from the first to the fifth century A.D., they bring along with them Christianity and Judaism and whatnot. So they're seen at this time period they're seen as to be a large Christianization and or Judaization from this people in the sense to where like the culture of their Christianity and Judaism is coming in and spreading through Africa at this time. And what's interesting about this is not like a Catholic Christianity. This is not like a European Judaism coming through. Again, this is a Sabian kind of a Christianity, Ethiopian kind of a Christianity, and a Yemenite, Himyarite, again Ethiopian concept of what Judaism was, or the Israelite tradition or whatnot. Again, this group of the Nefzawa, they divided their people into 12 groups, and like I said, also had some links with Christianity as well. Some other groups of Berbers being spoken of by Ibn Khaldun in this sense are the Fendanawa, the Mendiona, the Bakhlula, the Gyatha, and the Fuzaz. And so what's interesting to note about these is among some of these tribes, you'll note that, for instance, Tariq ibn Zayed, he's a famous Moorish general who rides into Spain in 711 AD, and starts a long period of Moorish rule in Spain. The Moors are there from 711 AD to the late 1400s, early 1500s. So for roughly 700 plus years, the Moors are in Spain in some way, shape, or form. Beginning with Tariq ibn Zayed going there, and even doing things like fighting alongside the Jews in Toledo, Spain, where when he gets there, the Jews and the Israelites there, they open up the gates for him and they fight alongside him against the Christians. But what's interesting about Tariq, General Tariq, is that he's understood historically to either be a Zanata or a Nefzawa Berber. So he is of what Ibn Khaldun would call part of the Judaized Berbers, riding into Spain and fighting to free the Jews / the Israelites in Spain and fighting alongside them to fight off the Christians. But a lot of people don't know that his Berber origin is of an Israelite Berber origin or a Judaized Berber origin, etc. Going further, this is just to give further context on something as well. Ibn Khaldun also thought that some of the Berbers were descended from Phoenicians and other people of Canaan that originated near Syria and were converted to Judaism. So even amongst other tribes, he felt like there was a conversion to Judaism, but from people of Canaan as well. So you can call them sojourners, etc., whatever you want to call them. But he was saying amongst the Berbers, there was a lot of this going on. some people push back on this concept, but there's a lot of reasons to understand this to be the truth of it. And I'll get into that in other videos. Like I said, I don't want to make this too long, but I just wanted to also put down there that Ibn Khaldun also associated these other Berbers, etc., with Himyarite origins and had links to Judaism and Christianity historically. So there's he's saying that there's people coming in from Phoenicia, from the land of Canaan, and also from Yemen, Arabia, etc. So there's a couple of interesting migrations being talked about amongst the Berbers or whatnot, and a couple of interesting groups that are being spoken of amongst the Berbers and whatnot. But what we see is that when enslaved, they're being called Negroes, and that some of the people that were enslaved did not want to be called Negroes. They wanted to be called Moors, and under the service of the Moroccan king and prince, etc., whatnot. But what's interesting about that is, again, that we see that there's an Israelite / Judaized Berber strain, and that at least three of these Moors that are petitioning not to be known as Negroes, they have Israelite / biblical Hebrew names. Now, that's not to say that more of them aren't of that same concept, but at the very least, you can see emphatically that three of them, at the very least, have biblical names that you're not going to see an average everyday Muslim rocking. And these are not even like a Muslim equivalent. And they have Arabic names amongst them, like Fatima. But this is definite proof on wax, on paper, of Israelites coming in from Africa during the slave trade. And not just coming to Africa during the slave trade, but also linking the fact that they're underneath the Moroccan empirical concept. And this is an historic time, going back to 711, and even prior to, when you really understand the history of it all. Of it all. But with that, family, I'm trying to keep this short as sweet as possible. I appreciate you for your time. I hope that clears up anything or a couple of things. If you have questions on anything I've stated, please leave a question down below. And like I said, I'm going to link a lot of this information down in the chat below. So with that, I say peace and love.